here at our Root Causes of Youth Crime Symposium here at LeMoyne-Owen College. I'm really appreciative of our host, LeMoyne-Owen College, and all the panelists who you will be introduced to in a second for bringing us together for an important conversation about something we know that is a pressing issue in Memphis and Shelby County and throughout the state of Tennessee. So I'm the mayor of Shelby County, and I am here to tell you that the last 2 years for yours truly and for, I'm sure, all of you have really been extremely challenging. We've had a pandemic, we've had isolation of our youth, and we've also had, in addition, a spike in our crime. And so we are working through all of those issues. There have been some bright spots with all of that. Shelby County, as some of you may know, have posted regularly some of the lowest COVID transmission rates in the entire state or the region. That's exactly right. That's right. And for that reason, that means we are safely on the road to recovery faster than many communities around the country. But we still have a lot of work to do to get back on that road, and making sure that our kids have plenty of an opportunity and are reminded of their bright future is one of those things that's a challenge and something that we all will have to work on going forward. So that's what the panel is about. We have some really great panelists, and I'm going to defer to Jerry Green, who's an assistant county attorney, to come to the podium and tell us about the panelists and get us started. But again, thanks to the panelists, thanks to LeMoyne-Owen College and Dr. Bennett Fairs for hosting this event. We're so pleased to be here, and thank you all for being here. Thanks very much.
Can y'all hear me? There we go. Thank you, Mayor. And again, thank you to LOC for hosting. I want to give a special shout out to Michael Robinson, who has been instrumental in helping us put this together. He is the Division of Social and Behavioral Sciences and the president of the faculty organization. Mr. Robinson, will you stand so we can give you a round of applause for helping make this happen today? And I do want to thank our panelists for coming and our guests for being here in the audience to listen to us on this important topic. I could start this talk by telling you about the recent Shelby County Crime Commission's report data that shows serious juvenile crime is up. I could talk to you about, of course, that public safety is a priority, a top priority of ours, and that we have a moral duty to our youth to turn that trend around. But I want to set the tone today by telling you a true and quick story. For many years, I was a juvenile public defender in Nashville. And I had a case of a child who's about 13, 14 years old. And he was charged with breaking into somebody's house and theft of property, felony charges. That's what landed on my desk. After speaking with him and with his mother, here's the real story. His mother had to go to work, but his 4-year-old little brother was sick. And she couldn't afford to miss any more days because their lights were already off and it was the winter. So she had her 14-year-old stay home with the 4-year-old. And it was cold and they were bored. And to ensure that he could make it through the day, he took an extension cord and ran it across the green space in their public housing. They were very close. Opened a window and plugged in an extension cord so back at the house he could turn on a TV and a space heater for his little brother. That was the case that landed in front of me. And I thought to myself, how many times, how many ways have we already failed this family? That we're here today, that they're here in front of me and hoping that I'm the one that can get them out of this situation. So that's what I want us to think about today. Too often, solutions are offered without looking at the root causes of crime. We want to seriously engage in a meaningful conversation, not only about the current problems we are facing as a community, but to look at real policy solutions to help alleviate these issues. To do that, we have brought together an incredible panel, who, as Brian Stevenson would say, in one way or another, are very proximate to this issue. And I'll introduce them shortly, but I do want to say that as you came in, there were note cards, and we can pass around more, and we do have pens as well. And anytime throughout this program, if a question comes to you and you want it asked, I want you to be an active participant and part of this conversation. There's a bowl up here in front. You're not bothering any of us. If you come up here and drop your question in at the appropriate time, we'll collect those and we'll get them asked to the panel. Anything we do not cover today because of time, please know that we are taking them back to our team to review as well. So with that, let me introduce today's panelists. I want to start with the Director of Shelby County Office of Reentry, DeAndre Brown. Mr. Brown? DeAndre is a Memphis native, and he split his time growing up between the inner city of Memphis and rural Arkansas. A gifted student, he spent 2 years on a pre-med track at Rhodes before being lured by, quote, easy money. This is his bio, not mine. Brown, who spent nearly 2 years in prison, founded a nonprofit organization, Lifelines to Success, in 2009 with his wife to help ex-offenders re-enter society. His own criminal history had blocked him from becoming a volunteer chaplain at a local hospital. This experience fueled his commitment to help other ex-offenders develop skills to re-enter the community and find meaningful employment. And as a side note, I hear he's a singer with the LOC Gospel Choir. We might have you break that out later. Next up, Judge Sheila Calloway. Judge Calloway came today all the way from Nashville. She's originally from Louisville, Kentucky. In 1987, she attended Vanderbilt University and never left. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication and a JD from Vandy. After graduating law school in 1994, she worked at the Metropolitan Public Defender's Office with me, specializing in youth justice. In 2004, she was appointed by Judge Betty Adams Green to the position of Juvenile Court Magistrate. In 2014, she was elected to serve an 8-year term as the Davidson County Juvenile Court Judge. And if you're from Nashville, she is up for re-election this year. She has also received the ICCA Doing What Works Judicial Award. She is a Centennial Legacy Award member of the NAACP and a Tennessee Justice Center Hall of Fame Award winner. Thank you, Judge Calloway, for coming today. And she might be in the colors of a particular sorority that is hosting an event in town. Next up, and I want to say a special thank you, I would like to introduce Judge Dan Michaels. Judge Michaels is filling in for us today, so we should give him an even bigger hand of applause. Unfortunately, Robert Armstrong, who is with formerly incarcerated youth, was not able to make it today due to a family emergency. And so I do not have a nice, pretty bio for you, but Judge Michaels has been fantastic to work with. And just recently, our office has worked with his office to embed. We've doubled the number of youth counselors in our police precincts to help stem the tide of children that end up in our juvenile justice system. And last but certainly not least, I am very excited for the first time to say these words, your Tennessee State Senator, London Lamar. London is a native Memphian with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science with minors in Sociology and Intercultural Studies from St. Mary's College. She is now, as of about 8:36 last night, the state senator for District 33, the youngest female legislator in our current General Assembly. She sits on the Criminal Justice Committee and has passed numerous bills of legislation. She is also the secretary of the House Democratic Caucus, the chair of the Shelby County Delegation of State Legislatures, the co-founder of the Next Gen PAC, and a member of the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women. So thank you. Thank you to our panel. So I'm going to start this off, and I will direct questions to you as I see fit. But if you want to jump in and you have something to say, please jump in and say things. So when considering the areas that are often listed as needing focus in order to solve crime, for example, adding more officers to our streets, funding education, offering stable employment, providing affordable housing, addressing poverty, giving mental health supports. Where do we start? Director Brown.
Testing.
Technical difficulties.
They will allow me to go first. It's good to be back in the little theater. I was a student at LeMoyne for a couple of years after I got my first conviction. Did serve in the gospel choir for a while, and this is where we would have rehearsal in the little theater. So I know this place well. When it comes to that question of what would be the best of the tenants to begin with, I would have to say the easiest way, the most important thing, is for us to be present. It's easy for us to try to find boxes to check to say if we work on this first, then this will happen. If we work on this first, this will happen. But you have to remember, we're dealing with human beings, not robots. And just because you say this should work here, it may not work there. And if you're not responsive to what will and what will not work, if you cannot be found, it is impossible for us to expect change. It is our responsibility, that I believe our responsibility, to fill in the gaps, not just for those in our homes, but for those in our families that we know are committing the crimes or causing the problem. See, we act like we don't know who's causing the mischief. We got them in our house, hell, in our neighbors' houses, some of them are related to us, and we act like they don't exist. One of the things we have to do is stop playing games with these folk and act like we really want to help change the system, because the world is filled with people, and people control community. If you want your community to change, you have to be present and willing to do something. Not be in the house, not on Facebook, not on Twitter, not complaining, but outside, taking your garbage out when kids go to school, going to the mailbox when you see children pass by and speak to them. You don't have to do anything active right then. Just let them see you. There's power in your presence. And if we go back to being present, we'll see a lot of things shift quickly, but it takes us being present.
All right. Judge Calloway, a simple and a difficult question. What works and what doesn't work? We hear a lot about harsher sentences, truth in sentencing, community policing, violence interrupters, restorative justice. In your years on the bench and as an attorney, what have you seen that works?
I love that question, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me down here to Memphis. It just happened to work out at the same time that this wonderful organization is celebrating their regional convention. So thank you all. When I think about the things that work and what doesn't work, the problem that we have as a system is that we want to have easy fixes. And we want to say, well, if we all do this, then that will work. That does not work. What works is if we take the time to talk with each individual child that we meet with, that we assess that individual child to see what that child's risk levels are, what that child's strengths are, what that child's needs are. Each individual child. And it takes time to do that. And that's what we owe them. We owe them the time that it takes to get to know exactly what it is that's going to help that individual child to achieve what we want them to do. So there's no easy fix. There's absolutely no cookie cutter. I remember before I became judge, we used to have these, cookie cutter classes, and Jerry, working together, some of them. We'd send them, if you stole a car, we'd send everybody to the Don't Steal a Car class and expect that that's going to change behaviors or that's going to last. Yeah, it may last for some of them, but that doesn't work as a whole when we do cookie cutter, fast-paced type of resolutions never work.
Thank you, Judge. I know, I want to clap after every single answer. Judge Michael, how can community members, such as the one in our audience today, get more involved in helping us find a solution to youth crime?
Okay, I've got a good answer for that. You come down to 616 Adams, you walk in either the north door or the south door, and you tell us you want to volunteer representing children, mentoring children. just a couple of nights ago, let me ask a question. Are there any 901 Block Squad members in the audience today? I don't see any hands. We have a group of ladies and gentlemen known as the 901 Block Squad. I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but they work with our high-risk juveniles in the community. Every single one of those members at 901 Block Squad are felons. Some of them have been convicted of serious crimes like murder. Others, drug crimes. They've spent years in prison. But let me tell you something. When I have a young adult in front of me in the courtroom, and Mr. Lightning from 901 Block Squad or Miss Simon from 901 Block Squad is standing behind that child, I've got options. Because I know they're going to follow them back in the community. They're going to be in their living room or dining room. They're going to be at their school. They're going to make sure they do what they should do to stay out of trouble. I look at everybody in this room, and if everybody in this room became a mentor for a child, that's a child we'd save. Period. End of sentence. Children need that adult leadership, and we're all adults here. So volunteer to mentor a child who's in trouble. You'll see the results. I promise you.
Speaking of the fact that we're all adults here, since we do have the youngest legislature, what are your thoughts on getting youth voices and the youth themselves more involved in finding a solution?
That is a very, very good question. Well, today we found out the youngest woman and youngest African Americans to ever serve in the Tennessee State Senate in history. But with that being said, I'm saying that to say because youth need someone they can look up to, who they can inspire them to do better, to strive for more, to seek more, to make them decide if I want to make a turn for the worse or do I have an opportunity to live a better life. And I think that it's important that we are also bringing in youth representation in order to mentor many of these folks who are not on the right path. For the last couple of weeks, you all saw in the news, I've been pushing a gun violence prevention bill, which is just still going. Because I truly feel that our youth are getting stuck in the criminal justice system. Rather, we can reallocate those funds to preventative measures to teach them simple things like this. Getting our Department of Education and our school system to teach conflict resolution skills. Teaching our youth how to use their words and not violence. Yesterday, 3 kids were shot at the Whitehaven Library because our own children don't know how to talk to each other. And I would agree with you all that it's our community responsibility to join into that, no doubt about it. But as a legislator, it's also my responsibility to craft a system that we're also accountable to giving our youth the resources they need to make it through many of these tough situations. So what this bill does is not only get the Department of Education to implement conflict resolution skills within our schools with youth, but it's also going to require the Department of Labor and Workforce to create a youth employment program so we can also see our children make money. Many of our children, and 50% of children in Shelby County schools are under the poverty line. They are acting up because they are hungry, they are tired, they are frustrated, and they are living in terrible conditions. But if early on we can show them an opportunity to make money and create a better life for themselves other than crime, then maybe we can start saving children in preventative ways. Instead of investing more into law enforcement and jails and things like that, and we need to invest in law enforcement, don't get me wrong. Our cops do a great job policing our community. But at the same time, much of that funding can go into giving our students and our children resources so the law enforcement won't even have to interact with them in the first place.
Thank you. Now, before I go through another round of my questions for this panel, I want to remind you that we would love for you to be a part of this conversation too. So if you have a question, please write it down on the note card, pass it up, or bring it up here into this bowl, and we'll get to it towards the end of this program. Next up, Director Brown, I want to ask you, because you deal with people who are re-entering society, what are your thoughts on being able, with youth, to be able to break the cycle of recidivism? What policies can we be implementing, and how can we invest differently to stop the problem of recidivism?
Good question. And I'll shift the question because while I do believe policy has a role to play, I'm not a policy maker, but I am a relationship builder. And what our children truly need are role models. And the word role is important because all you're supposed to do is serve a role. But many of us have been a derelict of our duties when it comes to the young people because sometimes when we get what we've been trying to get, we forget where we've come from. Because if we've come from poor situations, we don't want folks to know we were once poor. So it's hard to go back to a poor community and mentor a kid when every time I go back to their community, it reminds me of I didn't have lights, I didn't have food in the refrigerator. The trauma that we've experienced as successful individuals sometimes supersedes the need to go back and to give back to children. So how do we go back? How do we become role models? How do we see ourselves in the young people if we don't experience a relationship with the young people? Again, one of my frustrations in doing this work as a policy, excuse me, as a service provider, is you see people that complain, but you've never seen what they've offered as an alternative. You've never seen what they've done except complain. And in this room, I'm so glad to see all of you, and I know you all accept this charge. I challenge you to find you just one and become a role model. It can be somebody you don't know. It could be your nephew. It could be the one that the family has decided they don't think is worth saving. And if you act like you don't have one, you're a lie. We have got to get to the place where we get serious. And I hate when people say it's home training. I had good home training, but I left home. And when you go into the neighborhood as a parent, you must be responsive to who your children are in relationship with. That's why you let them eat dinner with you so you can hear what they say when they don't think you're listening, to tell them that who is Johnny. I need to meet Johnny. I have a son. I have 8 children, actually. But our youngest son wants to play on a basketball team that one of his friends, dad's the coach. And I told my son, I said, you cannot play on the team until I meet his father. He keeps coming to me trying to get me to meet his father. I have not made the decision yet that I want to meet his father, because if his father hadn't reached out to meet me to train my child, why would I go to find him if he wants my child on his team? That right there let me know that maybe he may not be invested in my child the way he wants to, the way I want him to be, because I'm fully there. Well, not always there, but I would talk a long time. But the point is, I need you to be role models. That's your challenge. When you leave this door, if your name on that road out there, don't just put your name on the road, become a role model, not with an L, but with an E.
Judge Calloway, you have spent many years in the system and have seen up close and personal many inequities in our system. What do you think is the best way for us to address those issues as we work to change the system?
I think the first and foremost best way to address the issues is to absolutely have everyone acknowledge the issues. I think we have a lot of people who, particularly when it comes to the number of disparities of the youth that we see on a regular basis, always say, well, it's because they're doing this, because they're doing that. If we don't say, no, it's because the systems together are hurting all of our Black and brown children, then we're never going to overcome what the system has done. And so we have to acknowledge as a community, as a state, as a country, that the systems and the way that the systems were designed and the way that the systems were made in order to discriminate against a particular class of people. And until we get to that point, we won't ever be able to actually change that. And so once we get there, then we can start breaking down how the system does that and how can we make a difference. I pride ourselves, particularly in I know Judge Michael's had some success too, in lowering the number of youth who are coming into the system. And that's a great thing. But every day when I look at the census of the people who are being held in my detention docket, that percentage is stayed the same, if it's not 98% of Black and brown youth. And I keep looking at myself in the mirror and say, well, am I one of them? Why can't I make this different? Why can't I change this? And I don't give up hope. I don't lose faith. I just know that we have to recognize when a child, like Judge Michael just said, when a child wakes up, or I can't remember which one said it, but when they're hungry, they're angry, they're scared, and they go to school and they can't keep their head up because they have all this stuff. And somebody comes and taps on them, and then they rear back because they have all this in them. And then that person who tapped them would say, that's not appropriate behavior. I'm either going to kick you out or do something, send you to detention or whatever. That's where we start this cycle. And so if we don't understand that we can't react as adults to children when they're acting out and act in a punitive manner, then we're not changing the system. Oh, sorry. I'll stop.
No, they enjoyed your point. They weren't cutting you off. But since you have stopped, I will move on. We've gotten a question from the audience about the place for nonprofit organizations and how they can help in this work. Judge Michael, what kinds of collaborations are you already doing? How could we build on that with nonprofits in our community?
Testing.
Technically illiterate. Nonprofits are essential to what we do along with volunteers. At juvenile court, we have our APO, which are auxiliary probation officers. They're volunteer officers who are trained to help children stay out of trouble. It's not a nonprofit. It's part of what we do in our community. And we run some programs through the court. But our nonprofits like Youth Villages, like Porter Leith, and many of the other folks out there who mentor and help our children and families understand something. You can't just focus on the child even as a mentor. You have to focus on the family. Because if you don't focus on the family and give them the resources they need to succeed, they're going to fail and the child's going to fail. Nonprofits are essential to what we do. Now, there's a caveat to that. Is the work they do valid? It has to work. If it doesn't work, we can't use them. And there's some good examples that have been proven not to work, like Scared Straight. Scared Straight was used for years, where we took young children into prisons and let the prisoners scare them to death. It doesn't work. Neither do camps, where we put them in camps and they're militarized and have to follow orders. They don't work. The data shows they don't work. So bring me something that works, where you're using the therapies and the interventions that help our children turn around and stay on a straight path. So we are always open. My door is open to any nonprofit, whether it's one person or whether it's somebody like Porter Leith or Youth Villages. And we're using Youth Villages Alliance right now for some of our toughest kids. The kids that are back in the community, because we feel like the best way to handle their behavior is to get them back in the community and treat them in the community from which they come. And the Alliance is doing great work. So that's just one example of many. But if you've got a nonprofit and your organization has a difference when they go out there and work in the community, come see us. We've got lots of kids we can send to you.
Thank you. Senator Lamar, you've touched on this a little, but I would like to delve in a little deeper about what reforms you think need to happen in our laws on the statewide level, of course, where you serve, but also locally. What are things that we could do now, or things that could be more long-term that we could make changes? This is why we're taking questions on note card.
Thank you. That's a good question. I think first and foremost, we must make sure that we are funding. Thank you. I want to make sure that as a state that we are, one, passing legislation that is preventative. And again, I want to emphasize that House Bill 1830 is a piece of legislation I'm proposing that is going to create a multi-agency approach to gun violence prevention. That includes law enforcement providing the Department of Health with data so they can make recommendations on the economic hardships, the mental disabilities that are going on, and some of the other issues that lead to violent crime in our community. Also making sure we create, again, workforce, education, and all the other initiatives we can as agencies and departments of the state of Tennessee can implement to reduce gun crime and create preventative measures. Secondly, as a state, we are the largest funding body for everybody in Tennessee. It is our obligation to ensure we're allocating funding to organizations and government agencies who are on the ground doing the work to prevent violent crime in our communities. That is, again, myself as currently advocating for youth villages and Alliance to ensure they get additional funding to do the work on the ground. That is our job. We also need to put in legislation to hold community members accountable, parents accountable. Get your kids to school. They need to be in school. And unfortunately, this pandemic has exacerbated the number of children who cannot be in school. But we also have to hold our community members accountable, because if we're just saying you need to do it, we know you need to do it. But what measures are we putting in place to hold you accountable to? Because the police department, juvenile court, they can't do the work on their own. And so to me, the issues of gun violence are not an overnight fix. It takes government entities coming in and creating policies and funding initiatives. It takes community members joining in. It takes nonprofits doing the wraparound services to help aid in preventative measures. And it takes a personal will to want to do right and live better than what your current circumstances are today.
Thank you. Director Brown, I don't know if we want to pass the mic. I reached out to some youth at an organization called Bridges that does wonderful work in our community to see what questions they would have for this panel. And as I said, we were hoping Robert Armstrong would be here to offer a youth point of view and voice, but I'm going to ask you their questions and see what your thoughts are as somebody who has both been in the system and continues to work with people who are in the system, especially as it relates to young offenders. What are we doing right or wrong to address the trauma that both the youthful offenders and those who are around them are facing in our community?
One of the things we're doing wrong is we're treating children as baby adults. We assume that a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, even a 16-year-old has the emotional capacity of a 36-year-old man. So when you attempt to give corrective action, you are correcting them from a standpoint of where you come from and where you are in life now, because it's very difficult to remember from whence you came, especially when it's something that you've been traumatized in and don't want to remember. So it's hard for educated people that haven't committed crime to come up with programs for people that have made a decision to commit crime. Because crime is not something that just happens to people. It's not a mistake in most cases. It's a conscious decision to go against everything that you've been taught, knowing what can come behind it, but you still make the decision to do it. I'm gonna ask this quick question. I want you to answer rhetorical. If you were in a situation today where your lights are about to be turned off tonight, would you commit a crime to keep your lights on? And the fact that you said no lets me know you don't understand this population, because that wouldn't even be a thought. It's what's going to happen tonight. But if we want to modify the behavior of our children, we must remember one thing. You must earn the right to modify another person's behavior. You must earn the right. You can't just say, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to put stipulations and rules and regulations in place without having a relationship first as the foundation. You have to earn the right, because once they trust you, they will listen to you. They'll see you in the Kroger and pull their pants up without you even having to ask. They'll stop smoking when they see you come because they know that's disrespectful. They do it to other people as a trigger to make the people say something to them so they have a reason to justify robbing them in the parking lot. But if you don't understand that, we need to have another conversation.
Thank you. And again, if you have questions, please just bring them down and put them in the bowl, and I'll continue to work them in and ask our panel. I have a question now that came from the audience and also came from our youth at Bridges. And so, since it's sort of a 2-for-1, I'm going to ask both judges to answer it. There seems to be, we were just talking about what we do once someone commits a crime. And there is a question on how do we balance rehabilitating this youth while also recognizing that sometimes there needs to be severe consequences for severe actions. How do we put in place laws, right, and uphold them where children, because we're dealing with a population that are children, both have consequences but still have the opportunity for rehabilitation?
So I guess I'll start, just Michael. That's a loaded question. First and foremost, I do not believe that severe punishment equals incarceration. And the reason that we are in the state that we are as a country is because we have this philosophy or belief that mass incarceration is the answer for changing people's behavior. And as someone said, it wasn't my quote, I heard it from someone else. If incarceration was the answer to changing people's behavior and keeping the community safe, then United States would be #1 in safety in our communities, right? Because we're #1 in incarceration, right? And so until we get past that belief, until we get past that belief, now you're right, until we get past that belief that incarceration is the only form of severe punishment that you can give someone, we will never make our community safe. So what it has to be, again, is having that relationship with that person and understanding how it is that person got to this point where they felt they needed to do a crime. Was it because the lights were getting turned off? Was it because, and Jerry, I remember that case like it was yesterday. Was it because it was a child trying to take care of their 4-year-old brother while their mother is out working and the only breadwinner in the house, and they trying to stay warm? Why would I lock someone up for that purpose? What I have to do is to figure out what it is that I can do for that child and say, we understand why you did what you did. Let's see, what can we give the mother so that when the child is sick again, the older brother isn't the caretaker? How can we help prevent this from happening? And I don't care what, and I sometimes get in trouble at home in Nashville because there are a lot of kids that have commit murders that are not in the adult system in Nashville, Tennessee. They might be at your school or at your neighborhood. I got some pushback when one kid went back to school and they're like, well, didn't he get charged with a murder? Well, yeah, okay. He might be at your grocery store. I mean, you don't know, but I knew what happened in that case. And until you know that, until you take the time to get that, and then you build the structures to help that child, that's the type of thing that's going to make our community safe and going to keep our kids out of the adult system.
Judge Michael, what are your thoughts on not just punishing the children, but actually doing things to help them thrive?
Yeah, I want to follow up with what Sheila started, and that's the number of people that are incarcerated in this country. 40 years ago, we had less than 1 million people in prisons across this country. Today, we're at about 2.3 million, I think, and most of them are black or brown. Now, you tell me, we're all thinking adults in here, we've got brains. You can do the calculations. Like she said, 40 years later, we're at 2.3 million. My simple brain tells me either we haven't built enough prisons and locked up enough people, or we're not doing it right to begin with. And I don't believe we're doing it right to begin with. There are people in prison who don't belong there. Period. End of sentence. Now, when we talk about our children, we were talking backstage before we started. The programs that the state has provided us over the years are almost gone. And I found out today that they are downsizing one of our secured facilities for children where we send them for rehabilitation after it's failed at the local level. They're downsizing it. We had 6 children stuck in our detention center last week because there weren't any beds at the state rehabilitation centers to treat them. Every time the state cuts their budget, they look at the Tennessee Department of Children's Services because children can't vote. If children could vote, we would have those programs. But adults are voting to cut the budget. You cut the budget, you put it back on the judges who have to sit there and make that decision whether we're going to keep that child in the community or put them in DCS for treatment. When you take that DCS away, we're lost. I've got children in Texas. You've got children. When we first got elected, we got on a plane and flew to Texas, and we had 12 children down there in Brownwood, Texas. I've never been to Brownwood. They shipped 12 of our children from Tennessee to Brownwood to treat them. You know how much it costs a year to treat a child in state custody? Anybody want to guess? $184,000 a year per child in state custody. You know why? They're not being treated at home. They're being treated in Wisconsin. They're being treated in Texas. They're being treated in Georgia. That's a crime. Michigan. Our parents can't get there. They can't get there. Somerville's the moon for most of our parents. They don't have transportation. And if you don't include the parents, it's not going to work. So local nonprofits, the courts, the work you're doing, the work she's doing in the legislature helps. But we have got to look at what we have statewide that assists the judges in rehabilitating these children. And a lot of the money that's been cut from the budget needs to come back to make it work. This stuff isn't free, it costs money.
Well, let's pick up on that point because there was a question submitted from one of the youth at Bridges, and you said youth don't vote. I think that's very powerful, and it is a truth. And I felt that when I was a juvenile public defender. These felt like people who were forgotten in our system. They were young, black, brown, sometimes had mental difficulties, behavioral issues, and they were being tossed away. They did not have a voice in our system. So to Senator Lamar, how do we make sure that they're at the table when you're designing these solutions, when we're figuring out these resources? What are ways that youth can get more involved in this process?
That's an excellent question. I think that it goes back to allowing them to take part in the political system. At least let me speak to what I'm involved in. I don't know, many of you all know me because I've built several organizations and infrastructures around getting youth involved in the political system, because if youth aren't engaged by the time they're eligible to vote or right before, they would never take part in being able to create a system and elect the leaders that represent them and their values. I remember when I turned 18 years old, my mother made sure I was registered to vote, and I voted. And I've been an active voter from that and have been able to choose who my leaders are. Youth have been absent from being able to partake in the political process. And it's all of our faults. All of our faults. It's our parents' faults for not reinstilling the values of civic engagement in our own homes, taking upon ourselves to include our children in the voting process, taking them to the polls with them, like my mother took me to the polls before I was 18 years old. It is also the fact that our election system isn't conducive to allowing youth to participate. There are so many barriers to even voting, having to register 30 days before an election. If you know it's election coming up before the 30-day mark hits, the address requirements, making it hard. We just now got online voting within the last couple of years, not knowing where the polling locations are. Polling locations are no longer in the schools anymore, so they're not even seeing people walking in and out voting. I've been introducing a piece of legislation every year since I've been in the legislature, trying to get our public colleges and universities to be early voting locations. And my colleagues, unfortunately, keep voting it down. And I'm asking why at a state-funded university, you can't put 3 voting machines. It makes absolutely no sense to me. So we have to ask ourselves a question is, leaders who do have the power to make these laws, why are you not changing laws and creating a system where our youth can partake in that system easily with little barriers? It's interesting, I could tell people all the time, at 18 years old, you don't have to register to buy a pack of cigarettes. At 21 years old, you don't have to register to go buy a drink. But you got to go register to vote, which is your constitutional right. What type of message are we sending to the public about who has the opportunity to create the system that we have to operate in? But until we get an opportunity to change the system, until we allow same-day voter registration like it's in other states, so it's possible, it's being done already, we're choosing not to do it. We as ourselves, as community members, as judges, as folks in this audience, as parents, as nonprofits, have to take it upon ourselves to ensure our children are registered to vote when they turn or right before they turn 18 years old. Because we don't get them right then, they'll never participate in the process. But I do want to give a special shout out to Shelby County Schools, because they have done, Shelby County Schools has done a great job at that. They do partner with the Shelby County Election Commission to bring voter registration in the schools. So I am proud to see that. But beyond that, are we actually turning them out and taking them to the polls after they're actually registered? So I do challenge everybody in this audience to understand we got 3 elections coming up right now. And all of these issues that we're talking about right now regarding crime, who our judges are, who's our elected officials on the local level, on a county commission, on the state level, your senators and representatives, your governor, all the major power players in politics right now are up for re-election this year. You got an opportunity to take them to the polls in May, August, and November. So my expectation is I see everybody with 5 kids at the polls this upcoming election.
You heard that here. 5 kids with you at the polls. I have my 3, but they can't vote yet. I have a couple of questions. I want to swing it back down to Director Brown from the audience. And forgive me, I probably should have said I'm not great at reading bad handwriting. So this may be a creative interpretation of your question. But we have a couple of questions that are about the conditions where our children live and how we address that. Where are they getting these guns, right, that are being used in these crimes? How can we address that?
Again, when it's a foreign environment, it may seem difficult to a person that doesn't live in what I like to call the criminal culture. You may think it's difficult to purchase a gun or anything illegal. But most of the times, you don't have to find a gun finds you. Or sometimes young men share guns. It's not like it's difficult to get a weapon to commit crime. That's why it is imperative that we do what we need to do to develop these relationships, to show people, our young people, that that's not the best way to be. I mentioned role models earlier because our young people don't really have positive role models to aspire to be. If you think about it, most of them want some studio time. They want to rap. They may be a good athlete, but very rarely do we see one that now wants to be a lawyer or a doctor. Very rarely do we see one that thinks it's possible to become a judge or whatever your profession is, because you didn't tell them about it. You didn't tell them they can be who you are. We've instituted in our office to make my office the place where people that are coming home and being put on parole, they have to come to my office for intake every Friday morning. And what I did this morning is I gave my introduction as who I am and what my title is, and then I put a picture of my mugshot behind me on the screen, because I wanted them to understand that this is where you are now, but this is where you can be. But have you done that? And it's not a knock on you. I know you ain't thought about it, but how many people have you told how to do what you do? How many young people have you said, come here, let me take you to work? My auntie, I went to Arkansas a little while ago. I'm from Arkansas too. We went over there, and I got to see some of the older folks that raised me. And I remember being a kid, and when I couldn't go to school because I was sick, I go to work with my auntie. My auntie had an 8th grade education, but she worked in a doctor's office. I learned how to draw blood, how to give shots at 7, 8, 9 years old. I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. I made some decisions along the way to change that, but if I hadn't been in the doctor's office, I never would have thought about being a doctor. Take your kids to work. Take your knucklehead nephew to work with you. I mean, it may not work today. You may think it's a complete waste of your time, but if you never make the investment, you can never get the return. Let us make the investment because our children deserve it. I wouldn't be in this position if I didn't get some home training before I made bad decisions, because I was able to fall back on what the elders taught me. They saw me acting up and said, come here, boy, you know better. Come here, you know. We look at them and be like, we're scared of our own children. How the hell, how are we afraid of our young people? Them our kids. And if you come to them like you ain't scared of them, they'll act like they children.
I really don't want to follow that. Right? With that being said, we only have a few minutes left in our forum, and I want to give our panelists a chance to offer any closing thoughts. You may have already given yours, Director Brown. But for our other panelists, are there any other closing thoughts about what we should be doing, what we should be thinking, how we should be involving youth to get to the root causes of youth crime?
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you again for allowing me to be here. I just want to finish kind of what the question you started with him, and then what Senator Lamar talked about earlier. I'm always amazed when people in the state of Tennessee don't quite understand why gun violence is getting higher and higher. And I'm like, do you watch the news? Did you just see the legislation that your state legislature just passed? Did you just hear that there's a bill now that says, can we lower the age of gun that people can, now we're going down to 18? And then you're going to ask me why I can't keep these kids from getting guns. Because they're everywhere. By our state legislators said, let's have them everywhere, except for in our chambers. But everywhere else, feel free to take a gun. Feel free to go to the bar and take a gun. Feel free to go to the park and take a gun. Feel free to go to the mall and take your gun. Feel free. And then what we do as adults, and one of my absolute favorite people, my role model was Marion Wright Edelman. And she says, we don't have a children problem. We have an adult problem. And so these adults who say, I have to have my gun everywhere I go, except I'm going to leave it in my car. I'm going to leave my car locked. I'm going to leave the keys in my car, and I'm going to go in the store real quick and buy some toys. And then I'm going to come out. And where your car at? And then more importantly, where's your gun? So quit calling me and asking me why I can't stop my kids from getting your gun that you left in your car, that you left your car with the doors open and said, come on in and get whatever you want. In fact, take the car because the keys in here too. Do whatever you want. Don't call me. Don't ask me. That's an adult issue. And if we don't start demanding that our legislature think about other people than just their right to carry a gun, permitless. So anybody can just go, let me go find a gun. And I don't know anything about shooting a gun, but yet I can carry it freely wherever I want, right? Until we as adults recognize that our constitutional rights affect others, particularly our youth, particularly our most vulnerable people, then we're never going to make our communities safe. We have to demand from our legislature to think before they act, just like they want our kids to do.
Here, here. Let me shift the conversation to something else that I think is really critically important. I want to poll my audience here. How many of you walked to school when you were in school, elementary? Yeah. How many of your elementary schools are still there? Okay. The Board of Education is doing a pretty good job with our kids right now. The pandemic just decimated children going to school. They weren't logging on. The numbers were extremely high. Over 40% were, not going to school. I'm born and raised here. This is my home. When I was campaigning 8 years ago, I was over in the Messick neighborhood. And there was an older lady sitting on her front porch. It was July. It was hot, hot, hot. And she invited me on the porch for some sweet tea. And we were talking. And I said, tell me about your community. What's the biggest problem you've ever had? She said, they closed Messick. They closed Messick. It was the heart of our community. Look around your community. You're all Memphians. You're all Shelby Countyans. Look around your community and look at all the schools that have closed. What's happening for us in Shelby County in the summertime, the number of children that wind up in our detention center in the summertime plummets because they're back in their zip codes. But because they've closed so many neighborhood schools, they're now mixing not only zip codes, but they're mixing gangs and they're mixing rivalries. And what happens after school starts, our numbers start to rise because the kids are getting in trouble. They're getting the guns by flipping door handles, right? They're getting the guns and they're getting in trouble. And by the end of the year, we're at 90 to 100 kids in detention. And then it starts to fall off. And in May, after they get out of school, it just bottoms out. Now, the really nice thing about the pandemic for us at juvenile court, a lot of the kids that were getting in trouble aren't getting in trouble. The bad thing for us is the kids who are really getting in trouble are causing trouble. Really, really violent crime has spiked in Shelby County. I think it's spiked in Nashville. It's spiked in, I'm past president of a national organization, and I can tell you it's happening all across the country right now. It's because of adults. It's not because of children. And I'm going to say this about guns. I grew up hunting and fishing. I know what a gun is. I'm licensed to carry a weapon. If you have a weapon in your car and you leave it in your car and it's not secured, shame on you. Shame on you. You can buy a cable, you can buy a lockbox, put it in your car and lock your gun up. I can't tell you how many cases I've had in front of me where the child got the gun out of the glove compartment or the middle compartment, or even the trunk. On our modern cars, all they have to do is push a button to open the trunk. Lock it up. We're seeing way too many children with guns, and children with guns are dangerous.
I do want to add the political aspect to that of, I think it's important for you all to actually actively take part in the political system if you want to change any of the issues around permitless carry and how we deal with crime, law enforcement, and youth. I can't advocate for the safety of our community by myself. I need help. I cannot do it on my own. I need you all to go vote. I need you all to elect leaders who are going to make sure they embody the values of safe communities, reducing gun violence, reducing the ability for 18-year-olds to get guns. Because as much as I push back against that, I'm outnumbered at the legislature. I mean, and I'm in a super minority. And not only do I need you to vote, I actually need y'all to come to Nashville. Because you all understand here in Shelby County the need to be stricter on guns. But that message doesn't get to Nashville if our leaders in this room are not joining me 3 hours up the highway to also ask my elected officials to do something about it. Please take part in the political process and actively demand the things that you want in your community. Because while they take our voices seriously, it always helps to see that I have a group of folks behind me, because all those who want permitless carries, our hunters, our folks in the rural areas, they at the Capitol. They got their guns with them. They're donating to their elected officials to make sure they get more access to guns. But where is our support? So it's on our community to also ensure that you're taking part in this system to help craft how we deal with gun crime in our state. Now, I'm not for this 18-year-old gun bill. I want to make that very clear today. I will not be voting for it. But again, if we're not elected better leaders, then it's going to pass. So get ready, because violent crime will spike if this bill passes the House, the Senate, and the governor signs it.
Well, I appreciate those thoughts. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? Keep it going for our host, LeMoyne-Owen College. And give yourselves a hand. I appreciate you being a part of this conversation today, being here, taking time out to come and listen about this really important issue. But this is just the start of the conversation. We should carry this forward today. There were ideas, bringing people to the polls, going to the Capitol, lots of things, mentoring that you should take from this. Go work with our youth. Go work at Bridges and be a part of their organization and their meetings they have come up. I see representatives of MICA here. Tune in to MICA. They're working on this issue. Join them in that effort. Find other worthy partners to help us get to these root causes and have this conversation. I also want you to take this issue to your spheres of influence, to your circles of friends, to your churches, your places of worship. We should be having this conversation in our schools, in our homes, around the dinner table together. Please also contact your local officials. I'm not trying to get my boss in trouble. But be a part of the process on the local level, on the state level. That is the way we are going to effectuate change, and definitely go out and vote. Thank you all for being here today. Will y'all hang tight so I can get a picture with the mayor? Can we get a picture real quick?